turn to the book of Ruth. So you can open up your Bible to Ruth, you can turn on your Bible app, what have you. We're, instead of going through a few chapters over a few months, we're going to do a whole book of the Bible in one day. Yeah. So has anyone read the book of Ruth? All right. So Ruth is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. But there's a danger of reading it just by itself, like in its own little content, or its own little, what's the word I'm looking for here? Context, and its own little, as much as I'm the context guy, I should know that. Yeah, so there's a danger in reading it just in its own little universe and its own little context. There's a bigger picture aspect that I want to cover today. But we're also going to examine it in its own little context. So what I decided to do is I asked for volunteers or victims, or however you want to phrase it, to read it for us. So Miss Kaylee is going to read chapter 1. And like I said, you guys can follow along or what have you, or you can just listen to Miss Kaylee.
Hello. Excuse my fair voice. All right. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and the man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, and he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech. Elimelech. I've been trying to get that. And the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Oprah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear your sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Oprah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went out until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest.
So we'll kind of just do it like we haven't done it quite like this in a while, but it'll be fun. So we'll just kind of go over what she read and what the context of what's going on. So notice the first verse. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled." This story takes place before Israel had a king. So Israel had been freed from tyranny in Egypt, and they crossed the sea, and the Lord eventually brought them into the promised land after all their, misguided attempts to apostatize and to not trust God after all he had done for them. So they go into the land, and eventually they take the land, but there's no king. The idea was that they would be governed by judges and prophets and things like that, and that's what the book of Judges is about. That's where you get your story about Deborah and Samson and what have you. And in the book of Judges, things start out kind of okay. They go in, things go okay, and then the people start to apostatize, and they start to be invaded by other countries and what have you, and the Lord would deliver someone to them, like a judge that would free them. And they'd go do okay for a little while again, and then they do it over and over. And steadily through the book of Judges, it gets worse and worse. So that's during the time this takes place. They don't have a king. There's no one to rule them, okay? And there's this famine, and they go to, Naomi and her husband go to Moab. Now, just to test y'all a little bit here, Moabites in the country of Moab, are they good guys or bad guys in the story of the Old Testament? They're bad guys. They worship other gods. They don't believe in Yahweh, the God of Israel, and what have you. And but they have no choice. That's where Naomi and her husband must go because there's famine there in the land of Israel. So they go there, and their sons take Moabite women as wives. Guess what? That's against the laws of Moses. There's 613 laws of Moses, and that's one of them. So the idea being that Israel was supposed to be a nation of priests. That's the way God described it to Moses. So Israel, with their God and his laws, would be so much different than the Moabites and all these other countries and their people and their gods, that they would be just kind of like awestruck in the way that they governed themselves and they worshiped Yahweh. And they would turn to him, and they would become Israelites. And that's actually exactly what happens. Naomi is probably thinking, I let my son take these Moabite women as wives, and the Lord killed them for it. And, she's very upset when she gets back. But notice, it's like the most beautiful line in the whole book right there in chapter 1. Ruth won't do it. She has been so changed by being married to one of Naomi's sons and watching their worship and the way they govern themselves, even in their foreign land. She's like, no, I love you. I'm going with you. Your God will be my God. That's beautiful. So it worked. Actually, they did exactly what they shouldn't have necessarily married, but they converted her. She was as much an Israelite as them at this point, maybe not ethnically, but she chose Yahweh over her own gods. She chose to go into a land where they were not going to be very nice to her. She's an outsider. The Jewish people did not like Moabites, but she did it anyway. She wanted to stay with her mother-in-law. All right, how are we tracking? Everybody good on the story this far? All right, so that's where we will go to the next chapter. Kay, are you reading chapter 2? All right, let me get you a chair.
Yeah. Okay. Ruth works in Boaz's field. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father in law, Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who had come back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." "I hope I continue to please you, sir," she replied. "You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers." At mealtime, Boaz called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine." So she sat with his harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted and still had some left over. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, "Let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up and don't give her a hard time." So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. She carried it back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. "Where did you gather all this grain today?" Naomi asked. "Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. She said, "The man I worked with today is named Boaz. May the Lord bless him." Naomi told her daughter-in-law, "He is showing his kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." Then Ruth said, "What's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed." "Good," Naomi exclaimed. "Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with his young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, but you will be safe with him." So Ruth worked alongside the women in Boaz's field and gathered grain with them until the end of the barley harvest. Then she continued working with them through the wheat harvest in early summer. And all the while, she lived with her mother-in-law.
All right, thank you, Miss Kay. So, I hope you noticed, the way she was going out into the field, she wasn't working per se. It was work, but she wasn't like working with the workers to harvest the field. What she was doing was she was going to get food for herself and her mother-in-law. Now think about this. This is a Moabite widow with an Israelite widow, and they're all by themselves. You think that's a good place to be for any woman in that day and in that time? Life is very hard for them. Very, very, very hard. But I mentioned those 613 laws. One of those laws was that farmers were not to harvest the edges of their crops so that the foreigner, the sojourner, the poor, the destitute could come pick it and eat and have food. They were also allowed, and this is what Ruth did, to go behind the harvesters and pick up stuff they had dropped. And Boaz, finding out who this woman is and her character because of the things he has heard, he's like, hey, look, you stay here because you're liable to go somewhere else to another field and they will not treat you kindly. This is a Moabite woman. They're probably going to call her every name in the book. You know what I mean? And so she does. She's able to provide for herself food and for her mother-in-law, and Boaz is showing his character. He's a stand-up guy. And it turns out he is their family redeemer. Listen for that word redeem through the next 2 chapters because it gets brought up a lot. The way their culture worked and the way their family structure worked, if someone died and they didn't have like another brother to take care of the family and what have you, someone within the family had the right to purchase the land that they owned and to take care of the widows. What's that thing I bring up all the time? The 2 main people that God says you should take care of, widows and orphans. And so Boaz is doing exactly what he should be doing. He is following the letter of the law that God gave to Moses. And so far, everything seems to be going okay. Naomi realizes who Boaz is, and this is their chance to survive. He has the chance to take care of them and to provide for them, to start a family for them, and this, that, and the other. And he's a stand-up guy. And I tell you, before I turn it over to Johnny to read chapter 3, if you've read the Bible at this point, like from Genesis to this part in Ruth, this is a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, there's actually like decent people in this story. And they're doing what they should be doing. Now, one thing I want you to notice while we're at this halfway point, has God been in the story at all at this point? So think about that. Look for it over these next 2 chapters. All right, Ms. Joni, are you ready to read chapter 3?
This is the when the Bible gets a little R-rated. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be provided for." Now, Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. That's sifting barley. Had to look that one up. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, nor rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today."
All right, so go back to my. So Naomi starts to form a plan. Hey, this guy is a family redeemer. Ruth, this is what you should do. Notice, let's see, what verse it is. Where she tells her, starts in verse 3, wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes. What she's telling her to do is to transition her dress from a state of mourning. Because, you would, in this culture and in this time, you would let people know, I am in mourning. Sometimes they would wear like sackcloth or, this, that, and the other. And Naomi is telling her, you need to let folk know you're out of this mourning stage and it's time, you're looking for a husband, basically. So they're still following the letter of the law and this, that, and the other. And there's some debate, I won't really get into it, about what exactly is Ruth doing when she goes and she lays down at Boaz's feet. I've never really been able to get a concrete answer. I've heard everything from that's just something they did to it was something sexual in nature or what have you. Not really going to get into that because I don't know for sure. This was an ancient culture on the other side of the world and they conducted things a little differently than us, and I'm not going to judge them for it. But she does what her mother-in-law tells her to do, and notice Boaz's character here. He's like, me? You want to marry me? Who am I? Like he's no one of importance. Are any of these people of importance? These are regular folk just like you and me. This isn't a story about judges or kings or people of stature or what have you. These are just lowly people going about their day-to-day lives just like we are. But they're stand-up people and they are following the law. And this isn't me trying to say we should be strict about this, that, or the other. We've talked plenty about legalism. But they're doing the right thing. Boaz is so excited. He would love to have Ruth as a wife, but he's like, well, but we got to follow the law. We got to do what Yahweh told us to do. And there's someone else. He actually is first in line. But I would love to marry you. And if I can, I will. So we're going to settle this. Cut to the next chapter. All right, Miss Diana, my lovely wife, she will read chapter 4. Do you want to use my tablet or your phone? Phone?
How do I adjust it? No, I'm a little bit taller. Yes, thank you. All right. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead and his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native people. You are witnesses this day. Then all of the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in the, terrible at pronouncing, Ephraah, and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named him, is it Obed? All right, ignore me. Obed? Sure. Okay, we'll go with that. It was either Obed or Abed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab, there you go, fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Solomon. Solomon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Abed. Abed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David.
All right. Thank you, my beautiful wife. Hey, let's give it up for everybody that read. I really appreciate you guys. Thank y'all so much. I like doing things this way because part of the church, at least in the early church, wasn't to get together on Sundays and sing praise music and give TED Talks. It was actually to edify. It was to teach. Because you had a bunch of Gentile people that didn't know about the laws of Moses or the what we call the Old Testament and what have you. So they had to be taught. So what do you think they did when they got together on Sundays? They ate and they worshiped and they taught. So anyway, so notice. This is the whole book. We read a whole book of the Bible in church today. That's something y'all can tell your coworkers. What'd you do on Sunday? We read a whole book, and it was from the Old Testament. But notice, God never actually enters into the story in this narrative. But he's working behind the scenes. It's his laws that they are obeying. And these are some of the only people in the Old Testament that actually obey these laws. Even the ones about like crops and stuff like that. Do you think it would be more beneficial for them to let strangers come and eat their crops, or do you think it'd be more beneficial for them to man, we'll go ahead and harvest it and sell it? But he's doing it. Boaz is doing it. Naomi has gone from this position of thinking that God has punished her for what she has allowed her sons to do to marry these Moabite women to converting a Moabite woman who stuck with her through it all. I mean, this is just God doing his thing in the background. And Boaz has this opportunity to marry this wonderful young woman. She doesn't care that he is like an everyday person, maybe a little older and not, maybe the best looking guy. He doesn't care that she is a Moabite. They're impressed with each other's character. And he even tells her, okay, I would love to, but we've got to talk to this other relative. And the other relative wants to do the redemption thing. He wants to buy this land. But he finds out the woman is a Moabite. Nah, never mind. I don't want no part of that. That might mess up my own thing. I don't want to marry no Moabite woman. I mean, call it what it is. They're racist. They're racist against these other people from other countries. But Boaz isn't. He's a stand-up guy, and it all works out well for them. And you can read this story like that, where it's like, man, this is just a really nice story, and it makes me feel good. And, like I said, it's a breath of fresh air because everyone else has been pretty suspect so far in the Bible, and it has laid bare all their character defaults and what have you, and it's a nice story. However, like I said, God is working in this story. He may never actually enter into it and talk and move, there doesn't always have to be a parting of a sea or what have you. Sometimes the Lord is just working in ways where it's like people are doing the right thing because it's the right thing and because they want to do right by Him. And these are just no-name people going about their lives, like I said. But where do they live? What town does this take place in? Anyone remember? Bethlehem. And, usually when we get to the end of Ruth, and you're like, genealogy, and I shut the, and then I shut the book and I'm done. But notice, this is important. These little no-name people are a part of the line of David. And how does the book start? Let's go back to the very first verse in chapter 1. Actually, let's do one better than that. I challenge you, go to the end of Judges. Judges 21, verse 25. Someone give me a thumbs up when you get there. All right. Going once, going twice. Here we go. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. And the very first line, why is Ruth in the Bible? Look at the very first line of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when judges ruled, there is no king. These people are going, they're out of control. They're doing whatever they see fit. They need a king. They could have let God be their king. This is a separate thing. This is in Samuel. But they reject God and they want a king. God's like, okay, I'm going to give you a king. And he works his, I don't want to say magic because God isn't a cosmic genie, But God does his thing, and he's working in the background to where these people, these no-name people who are just trying to do right by God and each other, they are a part of a much bigger picture. These are David's ancestors. The king, the greatest king that Israel ever had, second king. The first king, Saul, didn't work out too great, and it didn't work out too great for David in the long run, but David loved the Lord. And here it is. This is his family history. Now, just to drive this point home a little bit about how God works in these mysterious ways, and think about how Naomi was so upset that she had lost her sons and her husband. Of course she is, and she thinks God has punished her, and yet the whole while, God's doing something that she couldn't understand. And we do that too. This is an important book to think about. When nothing's going right in your life and you're just like, man, I don't know why God is doing this to me. And yet he's right there working stuff out in the background, and something amazing is going to come from it. So not only did David come from this story, was a result of this story, who's related to David? The Lord, Jesus. So I'll invite you to, we're going to do one more jump here. Go to Matthew 1. Because like I said, we get to genealogies and we're like, oh, never mind. And you skip it or what have you. But really what the genealogies in the Bible are for, it's almost like a recap. I'm old enough to remember like cartoons, that came on TV and what have you. And there'd be like a 2 or 3 part series, like previously on X-Men. You know what I mean? That's what this is. That's what the genealogies do. So when you read through the genealogy, you're thinking about all this stuff that has come before. So if you look at Matthew 1, this is a genealogy for Jesus. And you read through it, and you're like, Abraham, the father of Isaac, Isaac, the father of Jacob. And you're going through all these people, and you're reminded of what God did for these people. But you're also reminded of these people's shortcomings as well. Because their failures, you could look at it as just failures, and that's all they are. But even their failures seem to form this story that leads to the best thing that ever happened. Now, the interesting thing about Matthew is he actually includes women in the genealogy. He mentions Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute, and she's part of Jesus' line. And let me find, so verse 5. Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. All this craziness, do you think, we as Christians or some of our brothers and sisters, we like to make ourselves seem so much better than everyone else sometimes, and yet the line of Jesus had prostitutes and Moabites and God used these people to bring about our Redeemer. Did you notice how many times the family Redeemer or just Redeemer was said in this short story? It's like 20 some odd times. And the bigger story is the gospel comes from this. The cross comes from this. And these are just everyday people, like I said, going through the motions and living their lives, and yet they were a part of a much bigger story. And that's what we do today as Christians. You live as a part of the kingdom of God, and you're a part of this story. And Jesus came from this line, and he's our Redeemer. We need a Redeemer. Just like Naomi and Ruth needed a Redeemer, we can't do this ourselves. You cannot merit your way into salvation. You need someone else to do it for you. And God doing his thing, working through everyday people, set things in motion that would eventually lead to the redemption of the world. That's the story of Ruth. That's beautiful. That's Ruth in its bigger context. There are bigger things going on in our day-to-day lives that we have no idea how they will turn out. And often what we do is we get frustrated because we might be working towards something, and it might be for the greater good. It might be for the church. It might be for the Lord or what have you. And we're like, man, but none of this is ever going to work out. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll work out the way that you won't think it'll work out. I forget the person that said this quote that I'm about to paraphrase, but think about this. There are people that will plant trees and this, that, and the other, and they will never be able to sit underneath that shade. So there are bigger things going on than you and me and us or what have you, but you don't know what that future holds. You don't know the things that God's doing in your life day to day that might make something amazing for someone later on. And this is a feel-good story, but think about how it starts out. Naomi had a hard time. She lost everything. We read the good parts about Ruth's life, but can you imagine what her day-to-day life was in that culture when everyone thinks she's disgusting because she's a Moabite, just because of where she was born and, her ethnicity and this, that, and the other? But yet God uses these people and sets things in motion to where our Redeemer could come into play and redeem us. And that's the gospel in Ruth. So, a lot going on in a little 4-chapter book, isn't it? So I invite you, let's come up here and do our communion thing. I invite you, if you would like to take communion, by all means, please do so. If you don't want to, no big deal. No one's